Welcome to another episode of the AI in Manufacturing podcast here on Industry for Order TV. I'm your host, Kudzai Manditereza. In this episode, we will discuss quality control in manufacturing using AI visual inspection. And my guest today is Priyansha Bagaria, who is the founder and CEO of LooprAI. Welcome to the show, Priyansha. It's such a great pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Kudzai, for having me on your show.
Awesome stuff. So to kind of like kick things off here, could you maybe introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a bit more about Loopar AI and maybe a bit of a backstory on how the company was founded?
Yeah, no, great. So I'm Priyansha Bagaria, founder CEO of LooprAI. My background is I was the fourth generation entrepreneur in my family business of manufacturing, which was started in 1950s. So it's a long, long time back. And we when I joined the company in 2012, that's the time we were making some new products, new mica tapes, and it would have some defects which wouldn't happen every day. It might happen today, it might happen after 2 days. And since it was a tape, so you can imagine it can go inside, the tape, and you might not even see it. And it was a problem because these were shipped to some of the largest OEMs who would use it for Class H and Class F insulation, and you can't afford to have defective parts. So we will, discuss with my father, and we need to find a solution. And clearly, you cannot have a human, because imagine you have a human looking at it, and it doesn't happen. And the moment he gets distracted looking at his phone, the defect starts, and he misses it. And who really wants to do this job? Let's face it, nobody wants to even sign up for this job, right? The second option was technology. So having, I'm a computer science engineer by trade, so having that background, I started looking for solutions that exist in the market at that point of time. And to build something like that would have costed, $500,000. And I did take that idea to my dad, and he's like, clearly, you need to go to business school to learn how to do business. So basically, I ended up going to a business school, moved to Europe, did my MBA from Netherlands, was working for some of the largest CPG companies over there. So the same problem at a much, much, much bigger scale around packaging defects, in consumer products. And then moved to US, did a data science fellowship, got into AI, was part of AI consulting startup, which was focusing on retail for search, personalization, recommendation. And I always wanted to go back and solve the problem that I saw firsthand. So, finally started Looper in 2021. So that's a little bit background of, why getting into this traditional business of manufacturing and, providing technology.
Awesome. That's a great story. So I mean, quality control is not new, right? To manufacturing, and in some aspects, there's been some visual component to it. Could you tell us why that traditional approach to quality control is no longer sufficient for modern manufacturing environments?
Yeah. So I'm going to take this question in two ways. So one is based on the needs of the manufacturing companies and how that has evolved over time, right? So initially in the beginning, you had these people in the manufacturing who has been around for 30 plus years, and you have had these processes which was designed around those people, and where the focus was a lot on, you never really worried about macro inspections so much. It was all about micro, like dents, scratches, those kind of inspections, because you've had those people who were taking care of your macro inspections in any case, and you trusted those people because they've been around for, practically their whole life doing this thing. And then time moved, time changed. The average time where, a human would, no, you'll have an operator on the factory floor, and the past was like 18 years, 20 years. Right now is less than 2 years. So the same process just doesn't make sense anymore. Now you need a lot more monitoring. So right now we're seeing a lot of movement from just looking at macro inspections to macro, micro to macro, because that's really where, you completely dependent on human, and you want to make sure that, all the people, like, who are replaced can do the same job with that kind of accuracy. And that's been a big problem for manufacturers. Just to give you an idea, with one of our customers, they had 8 people who retired in 1 month, and all of them cumulative were 304 years in experience. So you can imagine all this, know-how, tribal knowledge is out of the factory, and that's a big problem. So that's really where, like, now we need quality inspection solutions that can help solve these macro inspection issues. And then the second thing is, fundamentally, this vision space was started by machine vision. So you had companies like Cognex and Keyence, who basically are the pioneer in that space with bringing in fixed camera, fixed part. You bring the camera to the part, do the uh, inspection using rule-based algorithms. Computer vision came along. They started providing AI-based algorithms, but it was still all about fixed cameras. Where the biggest paradigm shift with what we are trying to do is, how do we get away from that fixed camera and bring something which is real-time mobile, inspection, that can really disrupt, this industrial space with what autonomous vehicle did, in the technology did in the mobility space. So this is really the idea that, that is the need of the hour, with how to shift from the traditional ways of doing inspection to the need that exists today in today's manufacturing environment.
Awesome. Maybe let's kind of like, dive into this idea of AI powered machine vision to really understand how it really, makes quality control, or rather how it transforms quality control for manufacturing. Can you kind of like break that down for us, how exactly that works?
Yeah, so we're talking about AI, real-time mobile inspection, something which basically runs on your tablet. So it's like a phone or a tablet, So now most of these manufacturing companies today, they do have tablet to insert the work order, which is connected to the MCS system. So you've done a process, you basically enters the information, or you approve it in the system. We're talking about using the same tablet, literally, your phone, and you use the phone to move it around the part. And in real time, it can detect on that unstructured data that's coming out of the video stream. And it can detect if there's a missing components, or if it's an incorrect components, or if, let's say, the bolt is loosened, it's not tightened fastly. Because of that, the yoke is not properly seated. So these are what we're talking about, like where, you're using a mobile inspection system to do all these macro checks, and it can be used in multiple ways. So this can actually do multiple conformance. So it can check if there's a missing component, but it can also check if the component is there, is it properly fastened, or is it the correct component, or does it even have any defects, so we can also then do macro plus micro. So we are talking about multiple conformance using the same system.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, so you've got the sort of like, front end of that of system, and then I suppose also you do have some models, AI models running in the background. Can you kind of like paint a picture for us on what are the what is the required infrastructure or components for you to have such a system in a factory?
Yeah. So if you think about it, right, on the model layer today, in AI model layer, there's enough players playing. Every other day you'll hear a new model coming in the market, from like Gemini to OpenAI to Anthropic. There's a lot of players who are playing in that space. What's going to be the biggest differentiator is how quickly can you bring those models to the factory floor? How can you start making, how can you let a customer start using it very quickly? And that's really where, we've played a really, really important role. So we built a backbone architecture in today, that can actually process more than one model. So we're talking about, and more than, including large vision models, and we're talking about single shot, multi-shot trainings. So the way we operate today is that, a customer needs they need an inspection. Let's say they need a pinch bolt inspection. We can get them started day one. So we can give them a tablet. Within that, in that they have the tablet, they can get the application. Within that application, they can start collecting data. So using the same application, they can do. I'll give you an example of one of the customers we recently worked with. Last week, we got this new customer. They came to us with the use case. This was Wednesday. We got the customer the app. In the app, the customer started collecting the data. They probably collected 6 videos. We're talking about videos, no more images. So they collected 6 videos. Probably 4 of them were good, 2 of them were bad, defective. They gave us access to that through the app. We were able to access it, and we had that in on Thursday. This is the Looper team worked on it and trained the first model on Friday, and then the customer tested it on Monday. The model performed out of three. The model already performed well on two. That's how quickly we are talking about getting you started on a factory floor. Now, again, this is the first short training. Now, again, once you collect more data, we are hoping that you can, we're going to improve the accuracy. It's the same mindset when you hire somebody on the factory floor. Let's say you hire a welder. You're not going to expect the welder to come in and start welding for you from day one with the perfect accuracy. He will have the know-how of the process, but he needs to understand the nuances of your trade, of your product. And for that, you need to train that person. So how do you do that is you basically make that person shadow somebody who's been doing this job for months or years, right, to learn how that's done. It's the same logic. So we can get the operator started day one. They can start using the system to collect the data, to train it, and they can start using it. And as they use more and more the system more in their day to day, the model accuracy gets better and better. So yeah, like now, where in the past we had also taken months to get a customer going with, because we were completely dependent on collecting data in silos, to a point now that we can get them started day one. So it's a long journey that we have come. We've come a really, really, like, a long way, I would say, with the technology.
Interesting. So, as far as adoption of this technology is concerned, in your experience, which industries are seeing the fastest adoption of machine vision quality control?
I think automotive has always been the fast adopter for these technologies. Like they have the broadest, uh, you know, scope of use cases too, if you could think of. So I feel that's been one which has been very open. Now, when we talk about automotive, I can kind of say mobility, where you have like multiple, segments inside mobility. So you have like trucks, you have cars, you have RVs, you have, like there's so many tow trucks. There's so many different kinds of mobility, vehicles that exists out there. So I would say, and some of the use cases can scale so well. So like, for example, wire harness. When you talk about wire harness, you're looking at the same use case for aerospace. You can use the same for, they do wire harness. You need wire harness, a lot of wire harness inside a plane. You need wire harness in a yacht, in a ship. You need wire harness in cars. You need wire harness for HVAC. So technically, it's one thing, but it can scale horizontally so well, and it can go. So that's just, I think automotive mobility to me has been, generally has moved really, really fast in terms of adoption of technology.
And how easy is it to, I mean, talking about scalability, how easy is it to sort of like, train the inspection system on one line and be able to apply the results on another line, or do you need to kind of like do training for each line independently?
So yeah, I mean, just the when we started with this customer, the one that last week I spoke about, there was no prior data, and we could still get the customer started so quickly. Now, if you're doing the same process at another line, you can just use it off, the same system. You literally can use the same tablet and inspect it at the other line too, if it's the same part. If it's not, it's just, it's all about just fine tuning. So it doesn't, again, now we're not talking about months. Maybe we're talking about, maybe doing a quick training in days, and then get it to a point where you get. So it's all like the biggest barrier of adoption I always see is a couple of things, right? One is if there's a big infrastructure change. When you're talking about a fixed camera, you need to set that up, you need to align it, angle it, all of that. We are completely getting away from that. We're talking about something, which is mobile, which is literally a tablet. So you're not talking about a big hardware cost at that point. You can get started very quickly. And with all of that, right, like when you have a fixed camera, that's really where you were like, we need to collect, because you don't have a human in the loop. It's very hard to. But whereas in a tablet, you already have a human in the loop. So you can give feedback to the system very quickly. And now the models are so advanced, with Gen AI especially, you have prompt-based learning. You can do synthetic data creation in the backend. There's so many ways that you can support, in the model training, that you don't need insane amount of data as the dependency was in the past. So that has also happened. That has also helped to, to get to the place where we are today.
Awesome. All right, now I want us to talk about LooprAI's platform. Specifically, you've got what is called LooprIQ Inspect and LooprIQ Verify. So maybe let's start with the LooprIQ Inspect. Can you kind of like break down for us what that platform is and what it does?
Yeah. So Looper IQ Inspect is focused on identifying, micro defects. So like dents, scratches, all of those, right? Like which has been predominantly there since a long time, like fixed camera solution. Whereas, and we have also used IQ Inspect for paint inspection. But if you think about it, verification is just a subset of inspection, right? Like you just, it's just an easy way to, where we when we talk about verification, we basically like validating, which is kind of something that you're doing as in inspection too, right? If it looks good or if has any defects. Whereas, but we just want to basically classify it two ways, is that this is more on manufactured parts, where, when you make a part, you want to inspect it, does it have any surface defects? Whereas on IQ Verify, it is all about assembly verification. So you're looking at missing components, uh, you know, um, incorrectly placed components. Those are the kind of use cases that we focus on with verification. And within that also, like, verification, we see a lot more around paint inspection. So like, where you're not looking at, I mean, looking at doing a paint inspection for a car is very different from doing a paint inspection for a truck, for an RV. Because
Yeah.
in RV, you're not looking at extremely small defects. Whereas in car, of course, we just know how important it is to make sure that there's not even a single paint defect. So it differs. Where, so, that is one use case that we, again, it's literally the same, but then the complexities are so different for different industry. So, some of it, I mean, we do paint inspection. We've done paint inspection for aerospace parts as well, where it was about extreme small micro. So it's still paint inspection, but for aerospace, it falls under IQ Inspect for us. Whereas for RVs, we are looking at IQ Verify. So it's very interesting that, it's all about the complexities of a use case, that you divide it into two buckets. But technically, at the end, it's all Looper IQ that we are talking about, which is inspection.
I see. So it's really divided on use cases. I mean, so with the verify, is it some? Do you have some component of a co-pilot system, or where it checks and then kind of like guides the operator, or how does it work?
Yeah. Yeah, so the biggest value we see is like how the system verifies today is that the operator uses the system to, it moves the system across the path. The system predicts that, hey, I mean, I see these two right or this wrong. The operator can go and review it in the review mode and see exactly what happened. It's also storing the information, like what is this, vehicle number, VIN number, what is this VIN number? Because there's so much of recall that has happened in automotive industry. It's a big pain, because whenever it happens, it impacts your bottom line in a really, really big way. So, and it's hard to trace, right? Traceability is very, very important. So we also keep storing all the information on what that, truck number is, who worked on it, what time of the day it is. All of that information is also getting stored. And then we ask the operator to give a feedback. So, if they agree or disagree. And if they agree, it's good. If they disagree, and then what they can do is, if whatever error, they can fix it, and then they can re-inspect it. So now the last one, which was the final one, it's all getting stored in their this is the system is connected to the MCS system of the customer. So all that information is getting stored in the MCS system. So now let's say you have a warranty claim, you can actually go back and show them that, hey, this is how the part was when it left my factory. It's very similar to, like, how you Amazon now takes a picture. Every time you order something and it's delivered, they take a picture to prove you that, hey, you cannot come back to me and claim that I never delivered. Or it's the same way that you can have that as a proof that, what, yeah, like this is how we delivered. So you can imagine the value of it for, like, what we've seen is every stakeholder in the company have different KPIs. What a KPI is for a quality manager, to a KPI for a plant manager, to a KPI for a director of manufacturing, or to a VP of manufacturing. It's all so different, right? And it grows because the numbers are there. They are owning such a big number, right? Like, what a quality guy has to worry about, is just limited to his factory. Whereas for a VP of manufacturing, it's about all these multiple factories. So, for them, all these warranty claims can be very important. Whereas somebody, for a quality guy, he's really worried about, the efficiency, how much time it's taking to increase, whereas for a plant manager, it's all about the production numbers. How many parts am I, getting it out of my factory? How quickly am I doing it? So it's very interesting. The system we have built today can actually cater to multiple KPIs at the same time. It all depends on who cares about what and how they want to use it and how far along they want to use the system for.
Yeah, I mean that's super interesting, and a good segue to the other issue that I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, which is i- the fact that your platform caters to different KPIs for different stakeholders means that you need to have the ability to integrate with these systems, your CMMS system, MES system, or ERP system.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about what kind of systems do you typically integrate with, both in the OT and IT domain, and maybe kind of like talk to us about the integration mechanisms that you support for your
Yeah.
platform?
Yeah, so it's all API calls. Now it's become so easy, and it's so easy to basically integrate this software. Our software can easily support any of these API calls. So now you're not talking about like big, process to do the uh, integration. So with the tablet, I mean, it's going to be a web hosted app that's running on your tablet, so it's easy to host it. The system can be used on prem, or it can be, we prefer, I mean, ideally would be on cloud, but then we also support on-prem hybrid system. So when the training happens on the cloud and the solution is deployed on the edge, which use on-prem servers. And then, yeah, like, we have integrated as to some of these MCS systems have, and a middle layer, like an ignition point or something that they basically you need to connect to. Some of them it's a straight up, but most of it we have seen is through an API call. That's been something that we can easily support with the integration. And we're seeing that more and more now. Like, in the past, vision system was all about a standalone application, but now we are seeing that this can become a big data source for your bigger solution. Because, like, just to give you an example, with one of our customers, they had 5% defect escapes every month. The first month they started using it, and we could track it through the system because we saw how many issues happen, and they still shipped a part. And that was a huge number, because 5% is pretty big. Like, you have to bring, and we could have all this analysis around. We could provide that what time of the day did defects were bigger, I mean, a lot more, who was working on it. And then you basically, they can go back and check in the MCS system all the other information. Was it a part issue, was it? So if you think about it, this actually becomes a big data source to all the other information that you're already storing in your MCS system, along with images. So you can also see if there's any problem with the raw material that's coming in. So this can also be used with your incoming inspection. This can be something that's going to be helpful with your in-process inspection, and of course final assembly verification. So multiple ways you can use the system, and that's really how you need to start thinking about that. Hey, how can I make this a part of my bigger system than just having it as a standalone application?
Awesome. I mean, you have already kind of like mentioned, like, that it took a few days for one of your customers to really get up and running. But could you, for the benefit of our audience who are kind of like thinking about adopting this kind of technology, could you kind of like paint a picture for us on kind of like what that sort of like, timeline looks like from the time that they engage with you? What are the activities? Do you normally do a pilot first and then move to production? Can you kind of like paint a picture for us on what that timeline looks like?
Yeah. So the approach is going to be exactly the same when you hire somebody. So, when you hire someone, the person comes to your factory floor. The same way, we're going to give you access to our application. Now, using our application, you can, if it's something which is one of the models that we have already worked on, like we have a base model, we can immediately get started. But what we otherwise do is we ask you to give us data over, a few models to create that first base model for you and get going. That's going to be probably over 2 days work. So, you're talking about, let's say, 3 days in the job, and this is, you freshen up on the know-how of how this welding. Like, I'll give an example of welding, and then you basically learn that. Then, as then you, with the base model, the operator starts using it. So it's not going to relying on the system completely, but it's like giving it feedback. So it shows the system as it's doing the inspection. It's basically taking the system with it. The same way, when you have somebody, that person shadows someone who's doing the job. So he's looking at everything what that person is doing. The same way the system does that. And then, as they're doing, giving the feedback, they basically would know, there'll be a time that, hey, I've collected enough that now I need to know that, the system, we need to test it, we need to retrain it, or we need to make that, system be good at all these other parameters and criteria which is focused on art. So within, like, probably we have seen, like, between 2 to 3 weeks, it has enough info that we retrain the model again, like we go for another training. And then by, like, in a month time frame, you can have something which is, if not at par. Because today, like, the way you have to compare the system today is, what is the accuracy that my human has today? If your human is as good as 80%, you're not going to expect the system to be, 95%. That's just being unrealistic. You need to have a fair comparison, right? Like, if I'm as good as 80%, I cannot expect somebody to, come in within a week and within a month and become 95%, right? So it is going to, the advantage with the system like this is that a lot of the decision that's being made on the factory floor is subjective, is based on the knowledge and the experience of that person, and also based on if they are distracted, or if they are, like, you have to go for a dinner at 6 p.m., and at 5 p.m. you're like, oh, I need to finish this. We've spoken to companies, and one of the things that we've realized is the time that they make a lot more mistake is before the lunch time, or, during the end of the shift. Those are the critical time, because they're so, you know I mean, you're distracted, and you want to end this, and you want to move on with your plans, and you want to do something. And that's not something which your system would have an issue with, because the system would not have any plans like that. So it's continuously looking at it, and you're getting away with that, you know subjectivity. It's becoming it more objective, and it's getting away with all that, distraction, and you're having an inspector who performs the same way 24/7. So I would say you can get it started within, like, the same day, and then to get to a point where you can have it as a standalone, we have seen anywhere from, like, 4 weeks to 8 weeks to sometimes even 6 months, depending on, how complex or the use case is. But that's the timeline, I would say, that you can do with the
I
system.
see. Interesting. So, I mean, the introduction of a new technology in any, sort of like process is not without its challenges in most cases. In your experiences, what have you seen as kind of like being the most common challenges that manufacturers face when as they adopt AI-powered machine vision and kind of like integrate it into their operations?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge always is, if you have a system that's, you operate it in the silos where you have to collect the data and do the annotation and do all that process, that takes forever. Let's face it, because you have so much going on, and then sometimes your processes changes too. What you have collected during the day might not work in the evening. And it's funny, we met one customer very recently. The processes changes based on the season. So if it's summer, the moisture, because they have this moisture issue, so they have a lot more moisture and that impacts the process. Whereas in winters, the process, there's less moisture, because they have to cool the part. It's they heat it up, so they have to cool it. And now because of that, in summer, you can imagine they need to spray a lot more water to bring down the temperature for them to do the. So it's very interesting, right? Like it changes even. So you need to have a system which can easily adapt and adopt to all these changes. It doesn't take a long time. That what you've built today, like let's say it took you 4 months to get something going today, and then it's taking you another 4 months to make those changes in that system and get going. It's not it's not worth it, right? Like you don't want to go through that cycle. Whereas if you can have something which, if there's a change and you can make the change probably in like in 2 days or in one day, and you can adapt that, add that change to the system and get it adopted, that's really going to be a big differentiator for them. So I've seen that being like, one, and also having realistic expectations. Because if you think like, a lot of customers like, oh, we only want to start if it's a 98% accuracy or like 99%. It does make sense in certain cases because that's the accuracy that that's the use case that they're going after, and they want to make sure that it does that. Over there, you do need a lot more data. But like I would say a lot of use cases today, they're nowhere close to that accuracy by the humans. So like then the expectation is like clearly wrong, right? Like you need to see where you are today. So I would say even that kind of mindset is very, very important, to be very realistic on, how what you want to expect from the system to perform very quickly. That is something which is very important too. And then the most important thing is, the more you have as a standalone application, it's another thing for you to worry about. But if you can have that part of your system, as part of your main system, that also is going to be something which is going to help you a lot to manage in terms of management and in terms of scaling too, right? Because some of these customers, most of our customers today are enterprise who have so many factories around the world. So now if you have a system which is built for, like say you have the same MCS system all around the world, and if your system, your vision system is already integrated to that, anybody from any part of the world who's doing the same inspection can also start using it very easily. So the more you can bring in that kind of, you know, like I would say centralization to these technologies, that would also help in scaling too very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, what has been your experience in terms of the the culture shift? At least in my experience, when we talk to some customers, with introduction of a MQTT or unified namespace architecture,
Yeah.
there's always a pushback of kind of like this idea that we can't change our existing architecture, we can't change our existing. There's always some stakeholders that are not really wanting to change how they do things, and in some cases it may be sort of like a genuine kind of like concern. I remember in one company it was really about adopting our system meant that they had to get rid of 1,000 people across their enterprise, right? So
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of more cultural aspect of it. How has your experience been around that kind of like area?
Yeah. That's a very, very good question and very good point. So where we see us, like when we start with the customer, right? Like where the biggest, you will have somebody who has to sign off on the contract, but the biggest, the most important critical piece in all this is the person who's going to use your system, because he needs to have a buy-in. If you don't have his buy-in, there's no way you can scale or you can have more adoption, because I mean, it's not going to work. So I feel, we always call these people champions. So it's very important to have champions on the factory floor who's excited. Where we've seen a lot of success today is where there's a human in the loop aspect, where we bring in them a technology that they can help them to do their job better, right? If you start with that, that is the place where we've seen a lot more acceptance. Like, they want to learn, they want to feel like, and I think at this point of time with AI, there's so much about losing your job. It's a thing, right? People have in their head that, hey, this is where it's going to go to and we're all going to lose. The more you can make them feel comfortable, because even to run some of these things you will need people at the end, right? It's not going to be like, even to manage the technology there's going to be some requirements of the people that needs to be involved in it. So especially now, is like with movable inspection systems today, we see that a human is going to play a very important role. So for us, that has been a it has not been so much of a challenge of like, hey, you're going to replace me today. Of course, I mean, it can move to in that direction where it's going to be not about replacement but bringing in more efficiency. So like, you were hiring two people, now you just need to hire one, because your other person, you can free up his time to do some of the jobs. And the reality is like 25% of the workforce today is above the age of 55, and that's the reality, right? So we know that there's going to be a skill force shortage that's coming in near future. So it's just, I think the mindset is how you can change people's mindset is how do you make them feel comfortable and make them feel a part of the technology adoption phase, rather than making, if you try to do it in separately and they're not involved, then it's a big problem. So but I've seen like, where you've got them in a day, if it helps them, and I'll tell you, once they see the and once they start seeing this functioning, I have seen the excitement on their face, and they were like, "Wow, you know what? This is exciting. We want to use this. We see the value of it." So it's just it's how comfortable you feel, and when even some initiatives are top level, I understand, but there has to be some buy-in from the bottom too, because if you try to just drive everything on that level, that doesn't help you. So we try to take it on both ways, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I know you've kind of like highlighted a few sort of like use cases for us. Do you perhaps have a real world case study that we can kind of like focus on and kind of like highlighting the ROI or operational impact of your solution?
Yeah, there's quite a few, but I would love to talk about one, which is for, I mean, probably I can cover two. So we're talking about movable inspection systems. So again, this is for big, North American manufacturer in automotive space, and they had these, people working for them for really really long time, and they had this big issue of people retiring, and this specific inspection would require like level 4 inspectors, and it takes 15 years to become a level 4 inspector. So it's not an easy problem to solve, right? And if you want to increase your production, even if you want to hire people, where are you going to get those people from? Because they clearly are not too many of them who specialize in this job or who have that kind of level of experience. So it's like, how can we, what do? We need to bring some change in our processes, because it's not the resources that we have today clearly cannot help with that process. So we got them the system, and they basically we started with training it on the best inspector that they have who's been doing this job, and he was retiring in 6 months. So it was like, hey, it's a great time to get this in their hands, because they tried to try it out with a younger inspector, and the rework cost went up, because they were not identified, like let's say at station 2, and they'll only identify it at station 5. We're talking about bringing the truck back to station, the station 2, and taking everything apart and fixing it and then bring it. So it was like really a big impact. And the second thing is, this one specifically was also a big worry for them on the warranty side, because if this is not done well, and if there's a defect escape, it's about leading to accidents on the road. So massive impact on even on that side. So it was about how do we make sure we track everything, and we make sure that we not have so much of rework worry cost around that, and we can bring in more efficiency. So now we started with that operator, the senior, it was trained on, he started using the system, and then he retired, and then now it was easily moved on to the new guy who's learned the job, and he's can rely on the system because it's trained on the best guy. And that is really like, and so this has helped them with the keeping the traceability, conformance, helping also with, of course, bringing back, reducing the rework cost that they started having at one point. So it's multiple KPI impacts, I would say, that the customers already see. So now we started with one inspection, one type of inspection, but then they do multiple inspections every station. So we added more classes to it. Now, from adding in additional class to this, every additional class took them additional 1 week max. So it's like, we let's add this, let's add this, let's. So it's so easy to scale also. Like, I like, these critical things that I can inspect it together at one place. It works out really well. So we are looking at, we've worked with customers with, we've brought down like, 20-30% cost savings very, very quickly. And that's the kind of impact we're talking about. Again, it's across different ways. So it's like rework cost savings, bringing in more efficiency. So the time they take today for another paint inspection opportunity, we were talking about they would take 30 minutes to do an inspection. Now with our system, it's like a couple of minutes. So
Wow.
so much of efficiency on time. So it's just so many different ways, that we have worked with different customers where they've seen a value in different KPIs.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so incredible how AI is really, sort of like allowing manufacturers to achieve such kinds or such levels of efficiency. And really, that's one of the reasons why I started, this podcast to sort of like
Yeah,
connect people like yourself with manufacturing leaders to kind of like show them what's
yeah,
possible right now and how they can sort of like,
mm,
get started with AI.
yeah,
But still, we do have a lot of manufacturing leaders that are kind of like sitting on the fence and like, I'm
mm,
not sure if this is,
yeah.
mature enough for me to deploy in a factory environment. So for those leaders who are sort of like, sitting on the fence, not sure whether they need to adopt this or not, what do you have any sort of like advice for them on how they should approach AI adoption?
Yeah, so I feel like if you don't evolve and if you don't change, you're gonna get out of business because there's so much of uncertainty around, with tariffs, with so much of macro concerns, issues that's not even in anybody's control, not in your control, not in my control, anybody's control. And this is the time like when all of these things happen, like it's when COVID happened, companies realized they have to strengthen the supply chain. It was very clear, that was a very strong message. People wouldn't think it through, but that happened when when that last year the largest aerospace incident happened. A lot of companies started investing in vision space because they realized they need to bring in their changes in mac. So I just feel like we don't need to wait for one of these catastrophe to happen or something that goes really really bad and then it's like a weekly call. I feel there's ways you can, even if you don't have the confidence today on the technology, there might be small initiatives that you can do today to start vetting it. It doesn't need to be $1 million project, day one, but you need to have a part to that. How do I scale that? Because also one of the biggest problems that I've seen sometimes is that if you don't think it through enough, then and you don't scale the technology adoption, you're kind of wasting everybody's time in that too. So it's like having a bigger picture, but then starting small and then starting with that, start seeing the value very quickly and then scale for it. But I mean, if you don't change, the change is the only constant. And I always feel that sooner or later every company would move towards it, like they have to. So yeah, I mean, but the ones who move faster are going to always have an edge, a competitive advantage. And that's what, like, people who have adopted it and have come a long way are already seeing a difference. But then the ones who haven't, it's like you need to catch up, right? You have to deal with your competition too and with all these macro changes. So technology is the only path forward, the way I see it today.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, so we'll certainly provide some links on the description of this video and also on all the podcast platforms for those who want to contact you and learn more about your company. But just quickly before I let you go, could you kind of like give us a sense of what are you most excited about as far as trends in AI and visual inspection for the next couple of months or years?
Yeah, I think we've come a long way already that we don't need insane amount of data to train a model, but I want to get to, I see there is going to be a point where we don't need to train at all. And that's going to be ideal, right? Like the zero shot learning. which we all want to get to, where it like, and we have a path forward. It's going to take some time, but I'm sure with all the advancements that's happening around the model layer as well, uh, it's not far, I don't think it's like too far away where we'll have, we can have one model which can solve all the problems, and it's going to be very easy to adopt. With respect to macro, I'm very interested. I'm very looking forward to seeing how this tariff thing plays out. Hoping that this actually, has a positive impact and leads to more and more production, in US. I know there's a lot of worry right now across, but yeah, well, I mean, I still feel that there's going to be some really positive things that's going to come out of it. Hopefully, once we get to the end of it. But yeah, this is where
Yeah,
things
awesome
what
stuff.
I feel today. But thank you so much, Kudzai. I'm always excited about all your episodes. On the podcast, you have some really good people. And it's super interesting to hear all the innovations that's going around in manufacturing. So thank you so much for organizing these.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Priyansha, for taking time out of your hectic schedule joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
great. Thank you.